There's a ledger sitting in a regional archive in Central Europe, water damage, its spine cracked, its ink faded to the color of old skin, and on one particular page, a census enumerator's hand recorded 1,147 names. Farmers, innkeepers, blacksmiths, midwives, children. The date written at the top is 1847. The next page is dated 1851. The town is still there. The street still exists. The church still stands. But the 1,147 names are gone. Not dead, not moved, not recorded elsewhere. Simply absent, erased, as though the enumerator turned a page and found only silence. I kept returning to that ledger. The town is called Morova. It is a small market settlement in a valley that most maps from the 19th century treated as an afterthought, a name pressed into a corner, abbreviated, sometimes omitted entirely. It sits near the confluence of two rivers whose names have themselves changed twice since the Austro-Hungarian administration imposed new geographic standards in the 1880s. But in 1847, Morova existed clearly enough to be counted. The enumerator, a local schoolmaster named Joseph Fekete, whose handwriting appears across dozens of other regional census volumes, took his time. He noted occupations. He noted ages. He noted, in several cases, physical descriptions and family compositions. This was not a cursory count. This was a careful accounting of a living community. And then the community, in the bureaucratic record, simply stopped. What troubled me was not the absence itself. Absences happen. Fires consume archives. Administrative reforms rename and reclassify districts. Wars interrupt paperwork. Any serious historian will tell you that the 19th century record is full of holes, and that holes do not equal crimes. The mainstream explanation, when I first found it, was not irrational. The region underwent significant administrative reorganization between 1848 and 1852. District boundaries shifted. Populations were reclassified under new municipal headings. Many small settlements simply vanished from the ledger, not because their people vanished, but because the people were absorbed into a larger administrative category nearby. Maybe I'm forcing connections. Maybe the schoolmaster Fekete recorded Morova in 1847, and the new bureaucrats of 1851 simply filed it differently, except that there is no filing, no reclassification notice, no transfer document, no record of Morova appearing under a neighboring district's heading in 1851, or 1852, or 1855. I searched. What I found instead was a different kind of paper trail, one that did not explain the absence, but deepened it. There is a report filed in the provincial capital in the autumn of 1849 by a traveling inspector named Wilhelm Hardung. His assignment was routine. Assess road conditions, note the state of bridges, record any damage from the political unrest of 1848 that might require imperial attention. Hartung reached a valley near Morova in October. His report is 8 pages long. It covers the condition of a stone bridge over the smaller of the two rivers, notes a collapsed grain warehouse 3 kilometers to the north, and describes a road surface as requiring significant repair before winter. He does not mention Morova. Not once. He was, according to his route documents, within 2 kilometers of it. A reasonable person might argue that Hardung simply didn't visit every settlement along his route, that his assignment was infrastructure, not population, that a small market town off the main road was irrelevant to his report. That is a fair objection. It holds weight. But here's what I could not reconcile. In 1843, for years before Fekete's census, a different inspector named Lejos Biro filed a similar report through the same valley. Biro mentions Morova. He mentions its market square, its wooden-roofed inn, and a dispute over water rights at the mill. He writes about it with the casual specificity of someone describing a place well known to his office. 6 years later, in the same valley, on the same route, a different inspector writes nothing. The timeline refuses to stay innocent. I want to be careful here. I want to resist the temptation of pattern. History is full of gaps that are gaps and nothing more. Records are lost. Inspectors are lazy. Bureaucracies are inconsistent. These are boring, ordinary explanations, and boring, ordinary explanations are usually correct. But a third document changed something for me. Not dramatically, Quietly, in the parish register of a church in a town 40 kilometers from Morova, there's an entry from March of 1849. It records the baptism of a child. The mother's name is listed. The father's occupation is listed as formerly of Morova. The word formerly is unusual. Parish records of this period do not typically note a person's former place of residence. They note the current one. The priest, for whatever reason, felt that the man's connection to Morova required that particular word. Formerly, as though Morova had become a past tense. The child in that baptism record lived to adulthood. I found a marriage certificate from 1871 that names him. He appears in later censuses. He leaves a record. His father, the man formerly of Morova, does not. He is listed in the 1849 parish entry, and nowhere else. He came from somewhere, and that somewhere stopped being recorded. I began to look for others. What I found was not a conspiracy. I want to be precise about this. What I found was a cluster of similar small particularities, each individually explainable, collectively harder to dismiss. In the land registry of the provincial capital, there are transfer documents for agricultural plots near Morova dated 1848 and 1849. 3 separate parcels changed hands. The sellers in each case are listed by name. 2 of those names appear in Fekete's 1847 census. The buyers in each case are institutional, a land management office, a drainage authority, a church auxiliary that no longer exists. Land was being sold, or transferred, or acquired. The question I could not answer was, where did the proceeds go? Land registry documents of this period recorded transactions, but not always their financial terms. In 2 of the 3 cases, the transaction is marked with notation I spent weeks attempting to translate, a shorthand abbreviation used, it seems, specifically within this provincial office, in this specific period, for the specific category of acquisition. The abbreviation appears nowhere else in the 40 years of records surrounding it. Whatever it meant, someone coined it, used it 3 times, and never used it again. Now the obvious objection. Land consolidation was a fundamental feature of mid-19th century Central Europe. The revolutions of 1848 and their suppression triggered massive rural disruptions. Peasant emancipation, debt, famine, political instability. All of these moved populations and transferred land in ways that generated fragmented, inconsistent paperwork. The absence of an explanation is not itself an explanation. I agree. And yet, when I attempted to find equivalent examples, other small settlements in the same province that underwent similar administrative disappearances in the same decade, I found only 2 candidates. Both were documented. Both had clear transfer records, relocation notices, or evidence of population movement in adjacent archives. Both left a trail. Morova left silence. Not chaos. Not fire damage gaps. Not the ordinary entropy of a poorly organized archive. The surrounding records are intact. The regional archive holds well-preserved materials from this period. The absence of Morova's population from the post 1847 record is not the absence of a flood or a theft. It is the absence of a continuation. The same pattern appears again, in a different form. There is a school record, a list of students enrolled in a district primary school from 1846. 7 children from Morova appear on it. They are named. Their teacher is named. Their grades in reading and arithmetic are noted. In the enrollment list for 1848, the very next surviving record, only one of those names appears, listed not as a student from Morova, but simply as a student from the Valley District. 1 child. The other 6, gone from the school record. I don't have answers, only questions. What is the emotional core of an erasure like this? I have been asking myself that question for longer than I expected, because at a certain point, the archival investigation stops being about documents and starts being about people. About the schoolmaster Fekete who wrote those 1,147 names, who presumably knew some of them, who may have taught some of those children, who drank at the Imbiro described in 1843. He recorded a community with the quiet precision of someone who understood that precision was care. Someone who believed these names mattered enough to be written carefully. And then the names disappeared. Not the people, necessarily. Maybe the people went on. Maybe they scattered, married into other towns, built other lives, left their children to appear in other records under different headings. That is a hopeful reading. But here is what haunts me. The man formerly of Mirova, who baptized his child 40 kilometers away in 1849, was recorded with that word formerly by a priest who apparently understood that something about this man's origins required a different grammatical relationship with the past. The man had not moved from Mirova. He had left it. He had become a former resident of a place that was still, physically, a place. The valley did not collapse. The church still stands. The road still exists. Something ended in Mirova between 1847 and 1851. Something that felt, to a priest 40 kilometers away, like a before and an after. The archive is still there, and the word formerly is still in it. I looked for the thing from a different direction. I looked at what the folklore preserved. This is a method I approach with deep skepticism, and I want to name that skepticism openly. Folklore is not evidence. Oral tradition is shaped by time, by politics, by the desires of storytellers. Every region of Central Europe carries stories of abandoned places, disappeared peoples, cursed valleys. Many of these stories attach themselves to entirely mundane histories. Plague years, forced relocations, ordinary economic collapse. Mythology is not a record. It is a feeling given a narrative. But feelings sometimes remember things that records do not. There is a regional story, collected by a folklore researcher in the 1920s from elderly informants in the valley towns near Mirova, about a settlement called the place that stopped counting. The story is not about disappearance. It is about forgetting. In the story, the people of the settlement did not leave and were not removed. They simply became uncountable. The census takers came and could not hold the numbers in their minds. Whatever they wrote disappeared from the paper before it could dry. The settlement existed, the story says, but existed outside the logic of official enumeration. Now, I am not suggesting this folk story is a historical record. It is not. It is a story about something uncanny, shaped by decades of retelling, almost certainly attached to multiple events and multiple settlements, and filtered through the interpretive frameworks of every person who passed it on. But the specific image, the inability to count, the writing that won't hold, is interesting. It is a community's attempt to make narrative sense of an experience that the documents cannot explain. What if mythology preserved emotional memory? What if the people of this region knew that something about Mirova's record was wrong, and told each other stories about that wrongness in the only language available to them? What if the folk story is not a fantasy but a trauma, reshaped, poeticized, given impossible imagery precisely because the real event was too mundane or too painful to survive intact? I do not know what happened in Mirova. I want to say that plainly. The documents I had described are real documents. Census records, inspection reports, land registries, parish entries, folklore collections, but they do not constitute proof of anything beyond their own content. The absence of records is not the same as evidence of removal. The land transfers could be ordinary. The inspector's silence could be an artifact of his assignment. The child formerly of Mirova could have any number of ordinary explanations. But here is what I keep returning to. In 2009, a team of archaeologists surveying the valley near Mirova found evidence of significant construction activity in the 1840s. Stone foundations, a drainage channel. Evidence of what? They described as land modification at scale. Their report noted that this modification appeared deliberate and organized, and that it postdated the most recent medieval structures in the area by several centuries. Someone built something there, or cleared something there, in approximately the decade when the population record goes silent. The archaeological team did not know about the census. Their report made no connection to any administrative disappearance. They were studying the geology. They noted the construction evidence as an interesting historical footnote and moved on. I found their report 3 years into my research. Individually, these events seem unrelated. Together, they become harder to ignore. There is a question I have been avoiding, because it is the question that feels largest and most unanswerable. Mirova is not unique in kind. It may be unusual in the completeness of its silence, but the basic phenomenon, a community whose existence becomes administratively invisible during a period of political and institutional upheaval, is not without precedent. The mid-19th century was a period of extraordinary institutional violence across Central Europe. Populations were moved, reclassified, renamed. Languages were suppressed. Regional identities were dissolved into imperial categories. What the bureaucracies of that era could not control, they sometimes simply stopped recording. If Moreova's people were absorbed into a category the empire preferred not to name, a minority population, a religious community, a group whose existence was politically inconvenient, then the silence in the ledger is not a mystery. It is a policy. And if that is true, then the question is not what happened to people in Morova. The people were there. They had children who appeared elsewhere under other headings, as formerly from a place the records had stopped counting. The question is how many other Morovas exist in archives that no one has yet read carefully. How many other census ledgers turn a page between 1 year and the next and find silence where there should be continuation. How many other inspection reports travel within 2 kilometers of community and say nothing. How many other places became formerly. I think about Joseph Ekete, the schoolmaster who wrote those 1,147 names in 1847. He wrote them carefully. He noted occupations and ages and family compositions. He understood that a name written in a ledger is a kind of argument, an argument that this person existed, that their existence was worth the ink. He won that argument for 1 year, and then something larger and quieter than anything he could have anticipated simply turned the page. The ledger is still in the archive. Water damage, cracked, faded. The 1,147 names are still legible if you lean close enough and let your eyes adjust to the light. That's the thing about erasure. It is never quite complete. The names are still there. They are simply no longer being read. And somewhere in that valley, the church still stands. The road still exists. The stone foundations an archaeological team found in 2009 are still in the earth, holding the outline of something built in the decade the counting stopped. The buildings remember, even if the records don't. The ground still holds a shape of 1,147 people. And the only thing that disappeared, the only thing that was truly successfully removed, was the obligation to ask why.